We're going to continue learning about the spies and what they teach us in our own lives and how we're supposed to go about conquering our personal Canaan, and turning it into the spiritual experience of Israel. Now, in order to do this, we have to make a comparison between the two stories of spies. There's the story of spies in the parasha, in the Torah portion itself, and then there's the story of spies in the Haftarah after the portion. And you'll notice that there's certain significant differences between the two stories. The story of the spies in the parasha is the Jews came to Moshe and they said, look, you're taking us into this promised land. How do we know it's a good place? How do we know that what you're telling us is true? And Moshe says, look, if you have any qualms, I have no issue. You're welcome. You'd like to send a delegation to see the land? By all means. And he says to Hashem, what do you think? Should we do this or not? And Hashem says, and this is the opening line of the parasha, Hashem says, Shlach lecha. It's up to you. It's up to you. You send them. Shlach lecha. It's on you. And Rashi says, lecha means ledatecha. It's by your decision. It's to your mind. If to your mind this is a good idea, go ahead and do it. When it comes to the spies that Joshua sends, there the implication, it's not stated clearly, but the implication in the verse is that Yehoshua was instructed to send the spies. So that's a big difference between the two. Moshe's spies were his own idea, so to speak, by his own volition, a voluntary kind of a move, whereas the spies of Yehoshua were required. So that's the first big difference between the two. The second big difference between the two, which we're not really going to focus on much, but I just want to draw your attention to it, is that Moshe sent 12 spies, one for each of the tribes, and Yehoshua only sent 2 spies. Now, there is something to learn about that, but we're not going to focus on that. Instead, what we're going to focus on, this is probably the biggest part of it all, is that the spies of Moshe went for 40 days and 40 nights, in which time they went up and down the full length and breadth of Israel. In fact, Rashi says that was miraculous because nobody could cover the whole land in that amount of time. But Hashem assisted them, that they had, so to speak, Godspeed, and they were able to get through the land pretty quickly. The fact is that they went through the entire land, length and breadth. The spies of Joshua only went to one destination, the city of Jericho. And that's it. And even in the city of Jericho, how long did they spend there? I mean, the story goes that they arrived. They then found a place to stay overnight, which was in the inn of a woman called Rachov, a very interesting character who deserves attention in her own right, because at first she seems to be quite a wayward woman, but that's not so simple. The story is an interesting story. In any event, that's where they spend the night. And that night, she tells them, listen, you better get out of here because they're looking for you. So she lets them out of the window, and they make a deal that when they come to conquer the land, she'll extend a little scarlet thread outside of her window, and that way they'll identify that she has immunity, and her and her family will not be harmed by the invading Jewish forces. And that's it. They go to one location, and not even for 24 hours. In fact, the only delay in them getting back to Joshua is that she advises them to hide in the mountains for 3 days until the search party calls it off. So we need to understand what's going on over here. I mean, ostensibly, they're both the same kind of story. Before you go into the land, you have to send spies. But the minute you start to analyze the story, they're not the same at all. The stories are completely different stories. So we've got to appreciate what's going on over here. If you read in most commentaries, the Talmud, for example, speaks about it. The reason that Joshua's spies went to Jericho is because Jericho was considered Man'ulah Shel Eretz Yisrael. It was considered the lock, the most strategic city. If you had to attack Israel, that was the first city you had to confront. If you were successful in overrunning Jericho, the rest of the thing was going to be easy after that. So from a simple strategic point of view, you can see the difference. Moshe's spies, they were supposed to go just to get a sense of the land. Moshe tells them, find out for us what kind of people live there, what kind of cities do they live in, what kind of produce does the land have, is it an abundant land, is it a land where produce is scarce? So in order to do that, obviously they had to have an overview of the entire land. Whereas the spies of Joshua, their brief was, we're about to actually go into Israel. We're about to launch the mission. We need a strategic insight. And the strategic insight that they needed was, more than anything else, are they battle ready? Are we up against a formidable enemy, or is this going to be a relatively easy conquest? So in order to do that, logically, they went to the most strategic city, Jericho. It's the most logical place to go, because if you can break the lock, you can get into the land. So we understand why they went there. Secondly, we understand how they were able to fulfill the mission really quickly, because Rachav was a great gossip. She knew what everybody had to say, and she could tell them, let me tell you, the sentiment across the country is everybody's shaking in their boots that the Jews are coming, so you don't have to worry. This is going to be a walk in the park. So mission accomplished, and they can go home. Now, on a spiritual, personal level, we've got to understand what that all means. So far, what we've discussed is that the 7 nations who occupy the land of Canaan represent the 7 major character traits of every single person when they are immature, when they are raw, or even corrupted. And in order for a person to turn themselves into a holy place, like the Holy Land of Israel, you've got to work with that. So let's use one example to start. Let's talk about chesed, because that was the first of the traits that we looked at. So let's look at the trait of chesed and just understand and analyze for a second what good chesed is and what bad chesed is, and what a person has to do if their chesed is out of control. So let's say that you are a chesed dominant person. Some people are that way, right? A chesed dominant person. And you're quite proud of the fact that you're a chesed dominant person, because you tell everybody, I'm very kind, I'm very generous, I'm very patient, I'm very tolerant. Those are the typical things that are associated with chesed. Now that doesn't tell us that you're a healthy, wholesome person. It just tells us that that happens to be your dominant character strain. But we don't know if it's healthy. So for example, we don't know if maybe you're patient with the wrong people. Maybe you're tolerant of the wrong things. Maybe you're good to bad people. Maybe you're an enabler of toxic behavior. We don't know. We don't know yet if your chesed is a healthy thing. So the person has to do a self-analysis. What happens if a person recognizes that their chesed is unhealthy? In other words, I'm too soft. I don't know how to say no to people, so therefore everybody takes advantage of me. Or I'm too nice, so I allow people to do things that by rights I shouldn't allow them to do, either because I'm an authority figure in their life or because I have insight that they don't have. So really I should be reining them in, but I don't. I'm too nice. I kind of just let everything happen. Or maybe chesed is that I spend so much time and energy running around helping everybody else that I forget about my own self, my own family. So I meet a person. This person happens to be a Gevurah dominant person. So a Gevurah dominant person says, look, you need more discipline in your life. I'm a very disciplined person. I'm very strategic, and I can see exactly where you're falling down. You need more discipline, and you need a little bit more to be a little bit more assertive in your life. Now, what happens next when you have that kind of an interaction? What happens next? I'll tell you a funny thing. Very often that kind of an interaction happens in a marriage. So typically what you find is when a couple meets, what attracts the one to the other initially is, I see in my spouse, I see my partner, things that I'm not so good at. Subconsciously, I don't necessarily realize that these are things I'm not good at, but I like it about that person because they seem to have that strength. So the chesed, easygoing, highly tolerant, always volunteering kind of person likes the anchor of somebody who's a little bit more decisive and a little bit more grounded and a little bit more budgeted. You know, it's good. It kind of balances me. And that's what attracts people together. Then you fast forward a couple years down the marriage, and now they're fighting like cat and dog. Why? Because you're constantly criticizing me that I'm too nice and I'm too tolerant and I'm too easygoing or whatever, and you think I can just change, and that's the key. You think I can just change. It's not easy to rewire the dominant characteristics that we have. We could talk about it, we could learn about it, we could go to therapy for it. There are so many different factors that could potentially alert us to what needs to change. And that's great. And we can nod and smile and make commitments and promise ourselves things, but it's not easy to change. This is me. This is how Hashem made me. What do you want me to do? To lose my personality? There is tremendous value in, again, using the chesed example, there's tremendous value in the chesed because I am kind and I am giving and I am tolerant. So can you expect me to really intrinsically, fundamentally change who I am? And by the way, that's just one trait. We're just talking about the dominant trait. Can you honestly expect me that I'll conquer all 7 facets of my personality? That every part of myself will transform and will change? It's an incredibly high expectation. I'm not saying that we shouldn't aspire towards it. Of course we should. We should always have goals that are incredibly aspirational. There's nothing wrong with that. At the same time, we also have to be realistic. We have to be realistic in our expectations. So that's the goal. That's the long term. I'd love to get to a position, and I will consistently work on myself to reach a place where I can change the nature, the fiber of my being. But you can't demand it of me. You cannot insist that I'm an imperfect person if I haven't changed the wiring of my own character or my own soul. You could tell me it's aspirational. You cannot tell me it is obligatory. So when you have the story of the spies of Moshe, those spies, they go check the whole land of Israel. Because that whole land of Israel means that they want to totally transform from A to Z, from top to bottom, every single facet of their being, they want to change. It's great, it's wonderful, it's aspirational. Hashem says, I can't tell you to do it. Ledai techa. Moshe, you're an incredibly powerful person. You have an immense spiritual set of resources. So you can voluntarily choose to go down that path and to take your people down that path. It's a wonderful thing to want to do. Ledai techa. It's on you. Ani eini mitzava oischa. I will not instruct you that you have to totally rewire your whole being, because I know that it's incredibly difficult, and Hashem does not make demands on us that are beyond what we can be expected to do. Should we try? Yes. Should we feel like a failure if we haven't managed to totally turn ourselves around? No. That's why the spies of Moshe are voluntary. Tomorrow, please God, we'll learn about the spies of Joshua and what they represent, because that is obligatory. So that tells us what part of personal growth nobody is allowed to excuse themselves from. To be continued.